David Eby and John Rustad say that Ottawa needs to reestablish a dedicated policing agency at Canada's ports. We've been talking about this for the past couple of days on the program. The federal government back in 1997 dissolved the ports police, and we've spoken with a few people about this, including former BC Attorney General and former Premier Ujjal Dosanjh. We spoke with him on yesterday's program, and he says that port policing is not adequately resourced.
Local governments and provinces can't handle the burden that comes with the federal trade. And the ports should put some money back into policing, whatever the permutation or combination is.
Well, for more on those permutations or combinations and what they could look like, we have reached Doug Kiloh. He's the former head of the RCMP's National Ports Enforcement Team. He was also an investigator with the Cullen Commission of Inquiry into Money Laundering. And Doug, welcome to the program. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Stephen, and thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for taking the time with us. Just take us back, first off, if you can. 1997, the federal government, David Anderson is the Minister of Transport at the time, Jean Chrétien is the Prime Minister. They decide to dissolve Canada's Ports Police. Why did they make that decision in the first place?
Well, I can't speak to what's in the thoughts of politicians. I suspect the time is much different. The time was much different than it is today, and doesn't resemble the security and practical threat that comes through the port in our economy today.
Even then, Ujjal Dosanjh wrote to the minister in 1996 and said that, $2.5 billion worth of drugs had traveled through just the port of Vancouver alone, and yet they disbanded the police. What does port security look like right now? Who's enforcing the law at ports?
Well, enforcing the law specifically at ports is maybe a bit of a red herring in that description, because the port itself is a choke point. CBSA is involved, the RCMP is involved, CSIS would have some influence on what they see or hear, as well as the police of jurisdiction. So it's a multi-level, multidisciplined environment that right now isn't cohesive and coherent.
And how does it actually work? I mean, is it proactive policing? We understand that, some containers, a very small proportion of containers that come through Vancouver's ports and Delta Port are inspected for, I guess, illegal substances or illegal content.
Right. CBSA has always been underfunded for the volume of what comes through the Port of Vancouver in our case. And in the other ports in the country, I would assume. So first off, they would need some assistance. Our laws would need changing. Again, a multidisciplined view, because we have to project ourselves out of the country into other countries where the products may be coming or going. We have to investigate inland, and we have to be partners with other countries, the United States, Australia, and in some manner with other nations such as China.
And what would an effective policing model then look like?
Well, I think that there's a number of ways that you could increase a protective model, but it would require, first of all, the will of the government and the sustainable policy, not just at the port itself, but with the laws, our prosecution. CBSA, as I said, needs a very robust group down there in partnership with other federal law enforcement, the RCMP, and also with a complement of the police of jurisdiction. I think that we have to be able to have information, direct information that we can use from CSIS, and we have to have a very, very robust analytical and intelligence component.
We spoke with the mayor of Delta earlier on about this, and he tells us that police, if Delta police want to go into the port because it's federal territory, they have to ask permission. Who do they work? Do they coordinate with the RCMP? Do they coordinate with Canada Border Services? Do they have any business being at the port?
Well, they do have business being at the port. It's difficult, however, to allow just a uniform patrol to go into a confined or restricted area. Be no different than if police driving on the tarmac at the airport.
Right.
There's rules and expectations that come with that. So that can be overcome. However, you have to deal again with changing the laws or getting permissions and dealing with it. If there is a criminal act that is going on the port, there are ways to deal with that, and I'm certain that Delta would respond accordingly.
And would it be the same here in Vancouver with the Port of Vancouver? If there were a criminal act taking place in, plain view, and somebody called 911, would the Vancouver police respond?
Vancouver police, I would only assume that they would respond to 911. That is their duty to do so, and they would react to the level and an appropriate response. So I suspect that if there was by example, of a violent act going on the dock, that the police would be called and they would attend.
Both David Eby and John Rustad are both advocating for the return of the port's police. What role do you think politicians play in this?
Well, I think they play a very significant role. As the politicians canceled, as you pointed out, in 1997, the Ports Police, the politicians can reinstate it. They can allot the money and change the law and support greater policies with regards to drug interdiction, levels of interdiction, mobility and flexibility within the law, which is a problem for law enforcement. So there's a number of things that can be driven by leadership, political leadership, as well as policing and security leadership.
And how do we compare to other countries on this, Doug? How are we doing with our ports compared to, some of our neighbors?
Well, I would think that our response is less than a number and better than some. Uh, Certainly, in our time in policing, we have all kinds of examples in places like Australia, Japan, the United States, where there is significant deterrent and effort put into policing the port. And we don't have that same level here. Part of that is the laws we have. Part of that is the ability for our prosecution service. Part of that is the type of law enforcement that we have to adhere to in this country.
Doug, we'll leave it there this morning. Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's Doug Kiloh, the former head of the RCMP's National Ports Enforcement Team, also an investigator with the Cullen Commission of Inquiry into money laundering in the province of BC.